1800 and 1867, more than 40,000 voyages set sail from Africa to the Americas, crammed with 12.5 million unwilling migrants who had been sold into slavery in exchange for European trade goods. A set of complete plans has survived for just one of these ships. The ship was the Aurore, which left La Rochelle in France on August 28, 1784, bound for the African coast. The captives it obtained there were taken to Saint-Domingue, now Haiti, in the Caribbean, and sold to the owners of sugar and coffee plantations. We close in just before the ship arrives on the African coast to get a clear view of the conditions that approximately 600 captives had to endure on their 2-month middle passage to the Caribbean. The Aurore was a typical 18th century slave ship. The main deck shows 2 key features designed to control the male slaves. First, the barricado, a 9-foot high wooden wall that divided the ship in 2. This was topped with spikes and swivel guns. Second, 2 iron chains can be seen running along the upper deck. Every morning, the crew brought the shackled male captives up onto the deck from the spaces they had slept in overnight. The crew locked the main shackles into the chain to restrict movement. African men were not only chained in place, but continually within the firing line of the swivel guns. African women and children were imprisoned behind the barricado, normally unshackled, where they could neither see the men nor speak to them. Fearful that the male captives might escape their chains and try to capture the ship, the majority of the crew also remained behind the barricado. We descend from the quarterdeck to the officers' quarters and galley. A cook prepared the slaves' food in this boiler. The captives' diet consisted mainly of a starch such as rice, beans, or flour. Enslaved people were forced to eat this monotonous diet twice a day. They drank just 2 pints of water daily, leading to constant and often deadly dehydration. As the sun began to set, the crew, armed with whips and guns, forced the slaves below deck. The space below was divided by wooden walls to keep the men and women separated. The men were released from the deck chains and forced below, still shackled in pairs. Once below deck, crewmen packed the enslaved men together. Some were forced to lie on top of the platforms around the side of the room. Others lay under the platforms. Each captive, on or under a platform, slept in a space just 14 to 18 inches wide and 30 inches high. Most were forced onto their sides and pressed against their neighbors. Others sat in their meager, intervening spaces. The Aurore's prisoners spent at least 14 hours in such cramped, dirty, and stifling conditions which they endured daily for 2 or 3 months before reaching the Caribbean. We have no contemporary depictions of the Aurore's 600 captives as the vessel left Malimba to cross the Atlantic Ocean. We do, however, have an image of a cramped lower slave deck painted on a voyage of a smaller slaver, the Marie Séraphique, from just a few years earlier. This comes into view in an overlay as the camera zooms out. The overlay shows only 340 captives, while the Aurore carried almost twice this number.